Vasyl Maliuk is no longer the head of the security service of Ukraine. His position is temporarily held by a combat officer about whom the general public knows little, but whose operations have already gone down in history. Yevhen Khmara, what happened? Why now of all times? Who is the new acting head? What will we remember about the Maliuk era at the head of the security service of Ukraine? And most importantly, what new web is Vasyl Vasylovich already weaving for the occupiers? We break it down point by point, by the facts, no fluff, friends, in this episode. So please subscribe to this YouTube channel and don't forget to hit the like button. And so, as not to waste your time, I'll get started right away. So today, President Volodymyr Zelensky officially published two important announcements. The first was about a meeting with Vasyl Maliuk. Let's read out the key points. Met with Vasyl Maliuk, writes Zelensky. He thanked him for his combat work and suggested focusing specifically on this kind of work. There should be more Ukrainian asymmetric operations. Vasyl Vasylovich is the best at this, and it is precisely this that he will continue to do within the security service of Ukraine. He was tasked with making our asymmetric operations the strongest in the world. The key point, friends, is that Maliuk is not leaving the security service of Ukraine. He is focusing on what he does best. Asymmetric operations? In fact, he has been tasked with creating and leading a powerful world-class special operations center within the security service of Ukraine. And we know that Maliuk's operations are truly of a world-class level. Maliuk himself, in his address, in his post, to be precise, essentially confirmed this logic. That is, he wrote the following. I am stepping down as head, but I am staying within the SBU system to carry out world-class asymmetric special operations. I am confident that a strong and modern special service is the key to our country's security. The changes are aimed at this. So it's a formal resignation from the position, but not a dismissal from service. On the contrary, friends, it's a matter of specialization, and it's very important to understand this. But why right now? Well, rumor has it that when President Volodymyr Zelensky first suggested to Vasyl Maliuk during a meeting that he step down, Maliuk refused, explaining that he was in the final stages of grand operations like Pavutyana, the web. And reportedly, he asked the president to wait a little so he could carry them out while still serving as the head of the SBU. But things turned out the way they did, and now Maliuk remains in service specifically as an architect of such operations, but no longer in the position of chief. We will definitely talk about this a bit later, about the operations Maliuk is preparing. So who will take the seat? The head of the service? Judging by everything, it will be Yevhen Khmara. Zelensky's second post is precisely about a meeting with the head of the Special Operations Center of the Security Service of Ukraine, Khmara. He writes that he is grateful to Yevgeny and all our Special Forces soldiers for their extremely significant combat work. The experience of Ukrainian Special Forces and the Special Operations Center, and we will scale up the security service of Ukraine. We discussed other opportunities for the systematic development of the security service. Here, friends, pay attention to the wording. To scale up the experience and systematic development of the service. This is a hint that Khmara is not just a combat commander, but a person capable of building systems. Currently, it is Khmara who has become the acting head of the security service of Ukraine by decree of Volodymyr Zelensky. But who is he? What do we know about the new acting head of the security service of Ukraine? In fact, there is not much information about Yevhen Khmara. He is a career SBU officer, a major general. The media started talking about him more actively between 2003 and 2024 in connection with his leadership of the Special Operations Center. But one operation has already made him a legend. And that, friends, is the liberation of Snake Island in June 2022. According to the Security Service of Ukraine, it was the CSOA units, which include, among others, fighters specially trained for maritime and diving operations that played a key role in that operation. Here is how Khmara himself describes it. I quote, several of our combat groups were delivered to Zminy Island by helicopters. They took off and flew at extremely low altitude. So just imagine, friends, it's June 2022, basically the peak of the Russian Federation's offensive in the south, right? And what about the island? A symbolic and strategic point. An operation involving an airdrop from helicopters under fire, capturing fortified bunkers. In that assault, by the way, soldiers from the main intelligence directorate, Hermo, were killed. They used grenade launchers, even Bayraktars. Do you remember those drones? Bayraktars were used to destroy firing positions. Khmara calls this victory not only military but also psychological and economic, since it later helped to effectively unblock the Black Sea, and that's true. This was not the only operation. Alphas, my dear friends, they bravely took an active part in the significant battles for Kyiv near the strategic city of Bakhmut in the southern regions, and the most recent official report for what is essentially the year 2025 clearly lists an impressive 1,981 enemy targets that were successfully hit. Now that's combat effectiveness. This is what the special unit led by Khmara looks like. So look, Khmara is not a politician and not a manager. From his previous life, he is an officer of a new kind. He has been through this entire war, has commanded elite units, and by the way, took part in operations himself, as I understand it, and achieved concrete results on the battlefield. His appointment is a clear signal that the SBU remains on the front line of defense, and its leader must deeply understand what war is. Well, Maliuk, as we know, also understood very well what war is, to be honest. Without exaggeration, he had tremendous experience. He has a broad vision regarding this. So what actually preceded this? Maliuk's resignation. Now, this is actually an interesting question, friends. According to Ukrainska Pravda, the process was actually tense because as recently as Saturday, January 3rd, at a meeting with the president, Vasyl Maliuk refused to write a letter of voluntary resignation. His argument was as follows. There are several large-scale operations in their final stages. A web, they can't be abandoned now. And so Maliuk suggested that the issue of his dismissal should be decided by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine as stipulated by law. However, according to sources, the president had already made his decision, especially against the backdrop of a wave of public support. Support for Maliuk from the military and public figures, which the president's office could have perceived as an organized media campaign in favor of Maliuk. Well, sort of. The security service of Ukraine allegedly organized this media campaign. At least that's what these journalists write. We saw, friends, and I mentioned in previous episodes, that military journalists, bloggers, generals, and a lot of people actually expressed their support for Maliuk to remain in his position, and this was supposedly perceived as an organized media campaign orchestrated by the SBU officers. I don't know, at this meeting, even Zelensky, well, that's what they say. At the very least, he threatened to remove him from his position. He does have such authority, and we need to understand that this is entirely within the president's competence. We can be as outraged as we want or not be outraged at all. We may like it or not, but this is the president's prerogative. He decides who he works with and how. That's his choice. In short, in the end, Maliuk, as reported, made a choice in favor of the national interest. I believe that was the right thing to do from the standpoint of avoiding an open conflict at the top of the government during wartime. He wrote the resignation letter himself. Now it has to be approved by the Verkhovna Rada, and this story demonstrates several things. First, the president's political will for change, and second, Maliuk's authority, as he could count on support in the Rada, but also his sense of responsibility, because he chose a path that allows him to stay and do his job while avoiding a political crisis. Now, that is truly a very wise decision. Wouldn't you agree? Now, friends, the main point, what do I want to say here? How will we remember this period? The period when the SBU was headed by Vasyl Maliuk. Well, it was a real revolution because he transformed a Soviet investigative office into a modern, technological, militant special service that strikes the enemy everywhere, all over the world. And I have already talked about his top achievements in previous episodes. Let's go over them briefly. Let's recall. Pavutina 41. A Russian plane destroyed simultaneously at 4 airfields. A world-class operation, the Crimean Bridge. 3 unique attacks. The truck in 2022, drones in 2023, underwater. Drones, or the explosives in 2025 on the Sibaby sea drones. Our own development, 14 enemy ships hit, including a submarine, Novorossiysk, plus the hunt for traitors. And there were quite a few of them. And let's not forget, by the way, the elimination of generals, Kirillov, remember, General Kiva's scooter, the traitor Tatarsky, and others. In other words, the message is that betrayal will not be forgiven, plus strikes against the enemy's economy because of systematic attacks on oil refineries in the Russian Federation and the financial arteries of Putin's war. Internal purges, arrests of high-ranking officials, agents like Kulinich, Kozyura, and so on. Plus, SBU fighters liberated the Kiev region, the Kherson region, and fought near Bakhmut. By the way, the CSOA is among the top 3 most effective units in terms of the amount of enemy equipment destroyed. The fight for agents, as you know, is also at the highest level. Over 500 agents exposed, thousands suspected of treason, and 80% of terrorist attacks were prevented altogether. Maliuk changed the very paradigm of how the special service operates, friends, under conditions of total war. Active defense, striking the enemy where they least expect it, technology and public justice. Well, that's his legacy. Respect to him for this work. Maliuk is simply a legend, no exaggeration. So, friends, what do we have as a result? What we have is a change in format, not a change in judge. Maliuk remains on the front line of asymmetric warfare. His experience is not just being preserved, it will become the foundation of a new powerful direction. New operations are being prepared. I think, it's going to be even tougher, more tangled. There will be something so grand that it will set the Russians on fire. Secondly, the new leader is the combat commander Yevhen Khmara, a general from the front line. His appointment strengthens the process. Is ongoing because Maliuk's resignation still needs to be approved by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Then there will be a vote for the appointment of the new head. For now, Khmara is acting as interim, but his candidacy has already been presented. The SBU is not weaker. Let's not fall into pessimism. On the contrary, this is a reformatting. Maliuk was building and transforming, while Khmara is likely tasked with scaling up and systematizing these achievements during the war. So what happens next? We are watching the voting in the Rada. We are following the world-class asymmetric operations that Maliuk is preparing. And of course, we are waiting for new successful SBU operations under the leadership of the new head, currently the acting head, Yevhen Khmara. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it. Please subscribe more actively. Take care of yourselves and see you next time.